This is my workbench. It gets a little chaotic in the whirlwind of making things, but I do my best to keep it clean and reset after each project. On the other hand, my desk doesn't really stay as organized as I'd like it. This is actually cleaner than it usually is. It's a big ol' mess of cables and lenses that don't really have a proper place to live. This desk was originally built as a work surface centered around this camera mounted on a microphone arm, but since I built the other workbench, I haven't really used it that way. So what I'm imagining for this space is tearing out all this stuff and replacing it with a big shelf that covers this whole area, dedicated spots for all the chargers, lenses, the speakers, hard drives, all that. So first step is getting all this junk out of here and seeing what space I have to work with. And of course, as always, I'm going to be going in with no specific plan, just using scrap wood and letting that determine the design based on the materials I have. This little wooden box was originally a riser for the camera arm, but now it's become more of a storage for screws. Since the camera arm is going away, I don't need it for that anymore, so now it can just be screw storage. I like building these shelves as individual units so I can move them around as the use case changes. The first element of the camera gear storage is going to be this wide base for all the chargers and batteries. This is just a couple old 2x6s stuck together. I put my wood stain in a spray bottle since I find that a little easier for staining assembled pieces. I'm going to put the old screw shelf up here for now, but it might move for the final design. The main element of this shelf is going to be a lens storage rack. When I originally built the desk, I had like one real camera and 2 or 3 lenses for it, and I haven't really updated to provide adequate storage for the other stuff I've collected since then. With the basic frame done, now it's time to build the actual shelves. Designing efficient lens storage is an interesting problem because they can vary so much in thickness and height. I could store them sideways, but I don't really want my lenses rolling around on the shelf. The solution I want to try is presenting them at a slight incline. This way, lenses of different length can all sit side by side without creating big gaps. I also just think this solution looks pretty cool. I mounted the bottom shelf at 30 degrees and then just used spacers to align the upper two. The bottom shelf is spaced a little more to accommodate lenses with wider diameters. The lower section that's not at an incline I'm using for my tiny lenses, various C and CS mounts, and the top for now is just for adapters. For the sake of presentation, I added some little spacers for the shorter lenses so everything would be nice and up front. For my battery charging garage underneath, I added a piece of plywood backing and then put all my chargers in. They're all going to get plugged into this surge protector, which I'd like to hard mount. For these things with little mounting notches, you can put on a piece of tape and then mark the holes so you can transfer it over and get your spacing right. Now I didn't do that, I did something stupid. I checked if there was any important electronics at the corners, then put screws through it, which is a bad idea. Don't drill into surge protectors, please. But anyway, with that sorted out, I had power for all my various battery chargers. They actually fit quite nicely. So I've got batteries and lenses all set, but I want an extra area for camera bodies and for step-up rings. This is the same basic structure as the lens shelf, 2x4s and 1x4s, but this time I'm going to do a plywood backing. This piece of plywood's pretty warped because it was in my car for a long time, exposed to temperature changes, but screwing it down to a frame like this, it's not really an issue. After leveling my shelf using the level tool as intended, I had myself a base for this section of storage. I could see this needing expansion down the road, but that's why I'm making these rough, standalone sections so I can move things around later. I then added these little offcuts of wood as floating shelves to store various lens filters. I used fairly thick plywood for the backing so I can tap in screws to use as hooks for lens step-up rings. I've always wanted to set up something like that. For finishing touches, I added little hangers for the rulers that usually hang out on my desk. I also hard mounted the DIY speaker I made in a previous video and stuck the screw storage back on top. I don't know how I've operated for this long without having dedicated storage for all my camera gear. Most of it's just been sitting in that filing cabinet or out on the desk. And even though a lot of it is $10 junk bin lenses that I don't use that frequently, it is nice to have a place for all of them now. Like most of the stuff I make, this is far from perfect, but there's some good ideas here, I think, and it's a living workspace. Things change over time as my use case changes. And I think this is a really good starting point for that. I hope maybe this build sparked some idea for you for your own setup, or just the inspiration to go make something rough and dirty and see what happens. Workspaces don't have to be perfect, they just have to work. 2 weeks from today is the last day of my lease in this apartment. I'm moving 5 hours away, so all this is getting torn down and rebuilt back in the next place, which is kind of stressful, especially with the weekly upload schedule, but I'm very excited to be building out all this modular workspace stuff so I can tear down and kind of start fresh in a couple weeks. And speaking of the move, I'm going to be taking a short break from my weekly Thursday streams, so this one on Thursday will probably be the last in March, but I'm going to do my best to not miss any of the weekly Tuesday uploads, so keep your eyes out for those, even if they're smaller projects the next couple weeks. That's all for today. Go make some scrap wood shelves. Thank you for your time.